What's good YouTube? Today's video is going to be an updated guide for the Beast Mastery Hunter in Dragonflight. We're going to cover everything for the Beast Mastery Hunter from talents to tier sets, rotation, stat priority and consumables, and also any macros that you might want to use. And then also at the end of this video, I will go over my overall thoughts on this spec. So if this video does help you out, then please feel free to drop a like down below and also subscribe to your boy. But let's crack on with the guide. I've already got an in-depth guide out for BM that goes over the talent builds, so I'm not going to go over each node specifically, but there have been some variations in some builds. These will work depending on your comp or the fight, so I'll quickly run through them. As far as the class talent tree goes, I generally stay away from using misdirection as a BM hunter, as it doesn't really do much for us, as our pet's damage doesn't actually get redirected. But it can be useful in some scenarios if your tank needs help with pulling a mob out of the way. Personally, I also like to talent into Rejuvenating Wind, which I know some hunters do avoid. We're a squishy class as it is, so taking some extra healing can never be a bad thing. And next patch, this talent is also going to increase our health by 8%, so that's going to be another reason to put 2 points in here. Other than that, nothing has really changed. I could recommend you though to play Scatter Shot instead of Binding Shot in Pugs, but I think either are solid options and can also depend on your group. So this first build then is your standard raid build for single target or raid encounters like Teros. You'll be slamming points into mini cooldowns like Bloodshed, which is going to increase your pet damage by 15% for 18 seconds. Dire Beast, which summons a beast to attack your target and also increases your haste by 5% for 10 seconds. We then have a passive in Dire Command, which gives our kill command a 30% chance to proc a Dire Beast whenever we have 3 points in it. And then continuing down the left side, we buff our Dire Beast by 60% with Dire Frenzy. And finally, we put a point into Dire Pack, which is going to reduce the cooldown and focus cost of kill command by 50% for 8 seconds, allowing for some insane single target damage. Please bear in mind, this build really does barely any AoE, so if there is cleave present in the fight, you may want to run with a different build. Next, I'll show the go-to Mythic Plus or AoE build. This build specs into our AoE talents to deal some great sustained cleave damage through the likes of Beast Cleave, but also the new talent Kill Cleave, making our kill command also strike nearby enemies for 50% of the damage dealt. A massive reason as to why our mass AoE is so potent on the BM Hunter. Other than that, it's a pretty generic build. Coming down the middle of the tree will take 1 point in Brutal Companion for some extra single target damage, and 2 points on the left into Dire Command. Now this is where you can play around with your build depending on the dungeon. Generally, I'd recommend putting a point in Wailing Arrow for some extra utility in an AoE silence, but in specific dungeons or comps where you don't need kicks, you can also whack this point into Dire Command again, or I've even seen some hunters take Bloodshed in dungeons like Temple of the Jade Serpent, especially on tyrannical weeks. That being said though, it really isn't that much of a DPS loss just to keep Wailing Arrow though, so I'd just play around with what works for you. The last build that I want to showcase is a build I've got a lot of stick for, but I really like this build, especially in cases where your group has big AoE damage covered, and you can focus into more priority damage and also boss damage. This is a build that Banshees has been running, the #1 hunter on Raider.io, and although it may not be the most overall damage, it can definitely help speed up the key or make it safer by killing priority mobs a lot quicker. It's a hybrid build of the single target and AoE build where we're still going to take Dire Pack, but also puts points into Beast Cleave and Kill Cleave at the cost of 2 points in Thrill of the Hunt and also Brutal Companion. This build feels really nice to play, especially when you get the Dire Pack procs in AoE, but also on bosses I've been consistently 20k plus DPS ahead of the rest of my group because the single target damage is nuts. So that's about it for the 3 talent builds I recommend depending on the type of content you're clearing and also your group composition. Unfortunately, talents like Call of the Wild are just heavily undertuned at the moment, so hopefully Blizzard can balance these talents better going forward. For BM, our tier set works well in both single target but also in AoE thanks to Kill Cleave. It also works very well with talents such as War Orders, which encourage alternating between Kill Command and Barb Shot. But we were already using this talent for all forms of content, so our set doesn't actually change anything rotation wise. Our 2 set increases the damage of our kill command by 10%, and it also gives our kill command a 10% chance to reset the cooldown on Barb Shot. Then once you get your 4 set, Barb Shot damage is then increased by 5%, and also your Barb Shot will increase the damage of your next kill command by 20%. These bonuses are roughly a 5% increase each on single target and a 6% increase each on AoE. Onto the rotation then, the Beast Mastery rotation revolves around using Barb Shot carefully to stack up and maintain your pet's frenzy buff at 3 stacks. Then you'll be wanting to cast Kill Command on cooldown while regulating your focus with Cobra Shot. On AoE, you need to multi-shot regularly to maintain the Beast Cleave buff on your pet. For single target, this will be your opener and rotation. First, we're going to start off with 2 barb shots, then we're going to use Bloodshed, then we use Bestial Wrath. After that, we're going to fire off a Death Chakram, then we're going to use a kill command, into a barb shot, into a kill command, and then finally a Dire Beast. After this, we'll continue with our normal rotation according to the following priority list. We're going to use Barb Shot to refresh our Frenzy whenever it is about to fall off. And also make sure that if your Bestial Wrath is off of cooldown, then we're going to spend all of our Barb Shot charges before pressing it, but only if Frenzy has fewer than 3 stacks. Our next priority is to cast Kill Command if it is on 2 charges. This makes it so we never waste a charge of Kill Command. Then we're going to fire Death Chakram on cooldown, followed by Bloodshed on cooldown, and then followed by Bestial Wrath on cooldown. If the target is below 20% health, here's where we're going to Kill Shot. After this, our next priority is the Kill Command on cooldown. Here is where we're going to Barb Shot when its second charge is about halfway off of its cooldown, and we should also cast Barb Shot if doing so would reset the cooldown of our Bestial Wrath. With the talent Barbed Wrath, whenever we cast a Barb Shot, it is going to reduce the cooldown of Bestial Wrath by 12 seconds, so do keep that in mind. Next, we're going to use Dire Beast on cooldown, and finally, we are going to use Cobra Shot when we have nothing else to do. In AoE, our opener and rotation will differ, so your opener will start like this. We're going to start with a multi-shot to get Beast Cleave going on your pet early. Then we're going to use 2 barb shots, but the idea is to spread these out as much as possible. If you have the Razageth bow, then you might want to use a mouse over macro so you don't lose the buff. Our next global is going to be Bestial Wrath, followed by a multi-shot to keep up the Beast Cleave. Then we're going to Death Chakram, Kill Command. Then we're going to Barb Shot, ideally on a 3rd target, multi-shot again, and then use Kill Command. And then after this opener, we will follow this priority system. Our first priority is to use Barb Shot to refresh our Frenzy when it is about to fall off. And remember to try and spread out these Barb Shots on as many targets as you can. And also be sure to dump all your Barb Shot charges before you activate Bestial Wrath again. Next, we're going to use Multi-Shot to maintain the Beast Cleave buff on our pet. Then we never want to let our Kill Command cap on 2 charges, so use that here. Follow that with a Death Chakram on cooldown, and then a Bestial Wrath on cooldown. At this point, we're going to want to Barb Shot as long as we can maintain our Frenzy stacks. Then we're going to use Kill Command on cooldown, followed by a Kill Shot, and finally use Cobra Shot when we have more than 80 focus. If you don't need Wailing Arrow for its utility purposes, then here is where you would use Wailing Arrow, provided that we will not drop our Frenzy stacks during this time. Let's move on to the stats then. As always, if you're ever confused if a piece of gear is an upgrade, I would always recommend you to sim your character first. That being said though, this is the stat priority for the Beast Mastery Hunter. Here you can see that Haste, Mastery, and Critical Strike are all very close to one another. And although boring, this is why simming is always going to be the best for you because it will differ based on your current gear. Generally speaking though, your priority for secondary stats is anything but versatility. And this does apply to all forms of content. As far as enchants go then, on our weapon we want to use the High Intensity Thermal Scanner. On the cloak we're going to run with Graceful Avoidance, Waking Stats on the chest, Devotion of Avoidance on the braces, a Fierce Armor Kit on the legs. Boots we're going to run with Watcher's Loam. And for the rings, again I would advise you to sim, but you will ideally want to use a Devotion of Critical Strike, Mastery, or Haste. Overall, the file I'd recommend for the BM Hunter is the file of Tepid Versatility. It provides us with some nice flat damage, but more importantly helps us become a tad more tankier, which we need wherever we can get it. Elemental Potion of Power is your DPS potion of choice, with Refreshing Healing Potion being your best healing potion. Ideally you'd want to consume a Feast for the agility buff, but Feisty Fish Sticks are a good backup as some personal food. For gems, we deal well with all stats except Verse. I'd really recommend you to sim for which gem would best suit your character. For macros, I'll leave a paste bin in the description of all the macros that I'm currently using. You'll want this macro tied to all your damaging abilities, as your pet's basic attacks do have a slight delay on them, so this macro will make them more responsive and therefore you will deal more DPS. I also run a mouse over barb shot macro. This is because I have the Razageth bow, so if I auto attack a new mob, I will lose all the stacks of my bow and therefore lose DPS. So to spread out my barb shots, instead of tab targeting, I just use this macro and hover my mouse over the mob I want to barb shot. I have an @cursor macro for my abilities like Freezing Trap. This makes it so I can pre-place my cursor and then press the keybind and it will toss the trap to exactly where my cursor is without bringing up that green swirly. And finally, the most important macro, whenever I press turtle, this happens.
A turtle made it to the water.
Overall, Beast Mastery Hunters are a really solid pick in all forms of content. Unfortunately, we don't bring a raid buff and we are one of the squishier classes in the game, but we more than make up for it in amazing single target damage as well as sustained AoE cleave damage. I main a BM Hunter and more often than not in all forms of content I am on top of the DPS meter because of how strong this spec really is. It is also on the easier side rotation wise, which I'm a huge fan of because this allows me to focus more on mechanics and positioning, so I definitely recommend this spec to new players. And remember, we are the only range spec that can do our full DPS rotation while on the move. We do have some nerfs coming up to the Razlief bow in 10.0.7, but to offset this we are getting some huge class buffs which is going to result in an overall buff for our spec, which I cannot wait for because we are going to be insanely strong. If you enjoyed this video and it helps you or a friend out, then please feel free to drop a like down below and also subscribe to your boy, and until next time I'll catch you guys later.